What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of You Got Boston live on CLNS Media. Just got back from the Auerbach Center where the Celtics finished their first official practice of the 25-26 season. This is training camp week, so while a lot of the team has actually been in the building for most of the summer, I would say most of the guys have been in the building for the past 9-10 weeks. Today was the first official practice. So was a 2-hour practice. We heard from a couple of players after the fact, including Luka Garza and Xavier Tillman. And then we also spoke to Joe Mazzulla, as we'll be doing many times this week because the Celtics have practice today, tomorrow, Friday, Saturday. So it's a busy first couple of days here. So I wanted to talk, first of all, just to be able to jump on here and answer all of your questions, any questions you all might have. For those of you that are also following the kind of massive news coming out of the WNBA today with Napheesa Collier using her exit interview to discuss the commissioner of the WNBA and a lot of what's been going on behind the scenes, I will have a show on that in a couple of hours on WNBA Today on CLNS Media. So go over there and subscribe to WNBA Today on CLNS Media. We have coverage on all of the related things to the finals right now, off-court storylines as well, brand new channel. It's almost 2 weeks of having the channel. We're at nearly 1,000 subscribers, so appreciate all the support over there. But for this show, we'll be focusing on the Celtics because this has been a quiet couple of days of training camp, I would say. We heard from almost everybody yesterday at Media Day, and heard from Jaylen Brown, heard from Jason Tatum, the entire roster: Brad Stevens, Joe Mazzulla. We did a reaction show last night alongside John Zanis and Rob Manning on the Garden Report, but I wanted to come in here and reflect a little bit more today here. So drop all your questions in the chat, but for the time being, I want to start off with the biggest thing that I'm tracking here at training camp, and that's the battle of the front court. So everybody knows that the Celtics lost a lot of talent in the front court, namely Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, and Luke Kornet. Most recently, obviously, Al Horford, who signed or reportedly agreed to a deal with the Golden State Warriors. He can't officially sign yet. But what that means is that 3 guys effectively are vying for a spot in the front, for a starting spot, big rotational minutes, all of whom were not really rotation players last year. And those 3 guys are Neemias Queta, Luka Garza, and Xavier Tillman. And I think Neemias Queta has gotten the most coverage and discussion around him so far. And a big reason for that is because he played in Eurobasket, obviously, so that kept him kind of at the forefront. And he played really well for Portugal, and we covered that a lot on this channel. But also he had flashes of where he looked really good last year. He didn't play all the time, and there were certainly stretches of the season where he was DNP after DNP. But he did have games that he impacted. He had performances where you're like, okay, this is a very talented rebounder. He can finish around the basket. He can kind of disrupt things. And that's not something that we saw from Xavier Tillman. Xavier Tillman had a really bad year last year. There's really no way around it. And when we spoke to him about it today, he was candid. He was actually asked, how motivated are you to show that last year was more the outlier than the rule? And I think that's exactly what drives him. And I asked him specifically about the fact that he saw as the offseason was unfolding that the Celtics were losing a lot of big front court players. And I was like, is that a motivation for you to work on your game, to get in better shape, to hone your craft? And he was like, honestly, no. He knew after how last year went that he wanted to come back and be better. And so he talked about this pretty openly. He lost 12 pounds in the offseason. He changed his diet. He just eating chicken and rice, and he cut out pizza, and he cut out anything that is unhealthy. And his knees, which I don't know how much fans realize how problematic his knees were last year. He said starting in January, he was dealing with knee swelling. And then in March, he did a stem cell injection, which actually helped him quite a bit. But for a few months there, he was dealing with massive swelling. And he said today, he would do one scrimmage and then the next day he'd have massive swelling. And so it's if you're already a guy that's trying to get off the bench, that's a really tough spot to be in that situation. So Xavier Tillman, certainly, I think has not been at the forefront of people's mind. But if he's lighter and faster and he's feeling good and he's feeling healthy, which is what he signaled to us today, And if he can shoot threes, which that's the open question really with all of these guys, he could be fighting for some rotation minutes as well. And so that was super interesting to hear from him that he's at his best physically. Obviously, media day, everybody sends a positive signal into the world of how they worked really hard and they feel really good and all of that. That's kind of the norm for media day. But Xavier Tillman's really candid. And I actually specifically remember when we spoke to him for the first time last year, he said that he had to really kind of step away from the game for portions of the offseason. He lost his father during the NBA playoffs. And I think that he took some time with his family and kind of for himself. And so he didn't come back last year and say, I spent all summer shedding weight and working on my game. Like that wasn't the message that he sent us. And that was definitely the case this time around. And so Celtics fans might forget, but when he was first signed to that 2-year extension, the 2-year veteran minimum deal after the finals, people were thrilled. And then obviously last year just kind of goes sideways. And it's both the physical fitness side, but also I felt like there were a lot of times where he just looked not comfortable on the court. And he talked pretty openly about how he's been just taking a million shots. And so now he feels like he'll be able to shoot with his eyes closed. And he's not, he feels he didn't change anything mechanically in his shot, but you're not going to see him pass up threes the way that you did last year, because a lot of times he would have the ball in his hand and he would miss a 3-point attempt, or he would not take a 3-point shot and he would dribble into traffic instead, and it would ruin the entire team's flow. So rather than him take the shot and maybe miss it and maybe take an offensive rebound, it would cause a turnover. It would just cause another offensive issue. So hopefully you won't be seeing that. We'll have a better sense shortly when preseason starts next week. But that was really interesting to hear from him firsthand. And that was our first time hearing from him because he did not speak to the media at media day yesterday. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Luka Garza, who we also heard from today. But then I also wanted to mention some bigger picture things that I've been tracking around Jaylen Brown and Joe Mazzulla. But first, a quick message from our friends over at PrizePicks. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this season on PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. PrizePicks is a fun and simple experience where you can select your favorite players. For example, I really like watching Josh Allen play. I can decide if I want to do more or less than 270 pass yards, or whatever the player call-out projections are each week. PrizePicks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you should cash in. PrizePicks is also the best way to get action on sports in more than 40 states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks puts their users first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and accurate, and secure. PrizePicks offers Venmo, Apple Pay, MasterCard, and more for quick and easy deposits into your account this football season. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. So Xavier Tillman, I think, is somebody that might surprise some people, and he might actually end up impacting the rotation a little bit more than we expect right now, just considering the fact that he was maybe the least played guy on the roster last year. I mean, they were blowouts that he didn't even play in, and now in hindsight, I wonder how much of that was his health and his knees. And it's like, if he's already, there's no reason to bring in a guy who's dealing with an injury to play those end of game minutes. Luka Garza is somebody else who spoke yesterday and today. And he's a name that I've heard from a bunch of people around the building, actually, that he's really stood out so far. Luka Garza has been in Boston for the past couple of weeks. Obviously, one of the several guys that signed a minimum contract, to fill those front court minutes. And yesterday, Brad Stevens said, we did offer Al Horford and Luke Cornett contracts, but you can kind of guess what those contract zones are. And so it's the contracts that Luka Garza signed, in theories. That's kind of my understanding, at least. So Luka is somebody that had a great college career, and it just hasn't translated so far in the NBA. He's talked openly about how that's been a mental challenge. He talked about that today. But he's really impressed people with what he's brought to the table so far at training camp and so far just this summer with the work that he's committed to. And Josh Minot comes with him from Minnesota. Josh is a little bit more of like a small forward, power forward position, but also somebody that I think the team is excited about. You might remember they signed both of those guys really early in the summer. Like they knew who they wanted and they went out and they got them. And so while neither of those players are big names, they're both players the Celtics have tracked for a while now. And they're guys that they're hoping will be the next, Luke Cornett and kind of these hidden gems that have been sitting on a bench but haven't quite been able to make an impact. So I do think Neemias Queta is still the name to watch here. But Xavier Tillman, Luka Garza will be fighting for those minutes. And we heard from both of those guys today that the first day of camp was fast paced. It was a hard workout. And, you can tell that the group is younger this year. Tillman talked about that, how he could tell like it's a lot of young guys, a lot of energy. In past years, maybe they take it a little bit easier at training camp when you have guys like Al Horford and Drew Holiday and you're more worried about like not putting too many miles on people. But this is not the case right now. You've got a lot of young guys, a lot of energy in the building. And so I think that this is going to be a very hard camp. And Joe always kind of takes these things seriously, but a lot of running a fast pace. That was a big discussion point. And so we'll kind of see where all that goes. Something else that is different this year is that there are so many new faces. So Jaylen Brown and Derek White have both made an effort, and Jaylen talked about this pretty openly yesterday, to just bring guys together off the court. And so that included going to a Patriots game yesterday. They went to a concert on Sunday. They went to a concert on Sunday night. He's been having people over at his house, just little things like that. That because there are so many new faces, last year they brought back the entire roster. The only difference was they had Baylor Shireman. So it's like just integrating the rookie. That's normal, right? But this time around, you have nearly half a roster of new faces. And so Jaylen talked about how it's not going to be overnight. You have to get that chemistry going, get that chemistry together so that when the season starts and the first time you're on the floor together, there's that level of trust that you build off the floor. I thought Jaylen's demeanor on yesterday at Media Day was one of the things that stood out the most from this entire discussion, this entire couple of days. He was so calm. He was honestly seemed pretty happy. He said he found his inner peace. He said that part of his streaming and decision to kind of interact with the fans more has been part of his, just his discovering that he has his inner peace and that he wants to just be himself now and kind of let people into his world. So that I'm sure will benefit him. And I'm sure that the fact that he has this kind of free spirit and this kind of more comfortability up at the podium will be a good thing. So I'm curious to see, a lot of people have talked about, whether he's going to be a first team All-NBA type player. Derek White said so on the podcast. But at the same time, I also think that you're not going to actually see like a massive leap in scoring or a massive leap in like his box score numbers because you're going to see, in my opinion, and we'll see exactly how this plays out, more of just a change in how the Celtics play as a team. So it's not that now all of the actions that maybe Jason Tatum would run, Jaylen Brown's going to run. Instead, you might see a little bit less of the ISO, like matchup hunting offense, the killer whale offense, as it's been called, and a little bit more passing and cutting and pushing the ball in transition and playing at a faster pace and all of that. So I'm curious. It's something that the on-court differences is something that we'll keep our eye on. But certainly that is going to be a big discussion topic this season because ultimately I think when you look at this team and you look at the fact that they lost so much key personnel, they lost Porzingis, they lost Al Horford, Luke Cornett, Drew Holiday. You don't just do the same thing, but with a slightly less talented group, because then you're just going to have worse results. And obviously everybody knows that this group doesn't have the expectations that the last couple iterations of this team did. But they still want to be as competitive as possible, right? The fact that Anthony Simons is on the roster, the fact that they kept Derek White and Jaylen Brown, it's, the fact that they kept those guys, like they're not tanking. They're trying to be as competitive as they can be. They're going to be going for a playoff spot. And so I think you're going to see some play styles that are adjusted to better suit this roster. And something that Jaylen has talked about a lot over the last few years, and in particular, he named it at Media Day, but he's also said it openly in the past few years, is that he feels like this team will be at their best if they push the ball and they play as fast as possible. And I think Tatum sometimes likes to slow down, and obviously he's so talented. And he can read the game so well that sometimes it benefited the team as well. But with him sidelined, it seems like that's going to be a no-brainer. So we'll see exactly how that goes. I want to give a shout out to our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is my favorite app to purchase tickets for concerts, games, events. This year, one of my goals is to go to an NFL game. I've never been to an NFL game, so that's one of my goals to do so. Hopefully I'll be able to get it done at some point throughout the Celtics season. Seems like it's a good season so far to tune into. One of the things that's really cool about the Game Time app is that you can check out the all-in inclusive pricing. So you're not going to get any like last second. You go buy your ticket and you realize the price is a lot more expensive. Fees are all included. You can also see the view. So when you click on the seat, you can actually see what the view is going to be exactly from that spot. Low price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time also has ticket coverage, so your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download the Game Time app today. And I do love the Game Time app. Every event that I've purchased tickets to, whether it's for myself or for a friend or for a gift, I just go on Game Time and I see what the best deals are. In fact, I have some family members' birthdays coming up, so I will be making sure that I go get them some tickets. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is Joe Mazzulla's approach to this camp, because I think everybody is wondering how Joe is going to handle the fact that this team doesn't necessarily have the championship expectations or the talent that he's had for the 3 years that he's been head coach here. And so he's been really good at maximizing regular season rosters. I think you can go and look at some of the playoff struggles, including like the Miami series, even the Philadelphia series in 2023. Obviously, they win the Philadelphia series, but there were some struggles there, right? And you look at last year, the Knicks series, I think that he would probably go back and change some things that they did as a team, and blowing those 2 20-point leads is not a great thing to have on your record. That being said, obviously Joe Mazzulla is the coach that led the Celtics to a title in 2024. But he's also the coach that led the Celtics to 3 really, really good regular seasons. So when it comes to regular season record, like Joe Mazzulla has a pretty flawless record. And in fact, his overall win percentage is the highest for a coach in NBA history that's coached that many games. So whether that streak gets disrupted this year, it might, because certainly he doesn't have the talent that he's had in years past. But I can say that from what he said to us at the podium and just from having conversations around the building, like he is 1000% intending on the Celtics winning as many games as possible this season. And then he has guys like Jaylen Brown, Peyton Pritchard that are really kind of carrying the mantle for all of that. So will the winning percentage plummet? It certainly will not be what it was last year. Is it enough to still stay in the lead? We'll see. Especially if next year they come back and they're a really good team again. He might end up having that record for a while, but we'll see how this year goes. But I think that this camp is going to be they're going to lean into like the playing hard, the being the team that wants it more. They haven't always leaned into that because they've just been the more talented team. They've been the team that is resting guys that are older, that are in back-to-backs, that are constantly thinking about like, we want to save bodies for the playoffs, right? Like both of these past few Marches, like they're resting guys, just because they have a lot of miles and they have a playoff run coming up. So like that's been the nature of how they've approached the regular season, and still they've been able to squeeze out so many wins that I do think you're going to see this season, that they're going to come 100% like maximize every single night. And will there be a point where maybe they're like, you know what, we're out of the playoff picture and Jaylen's knees flaring up and we're going to, shut him down, or like that's very possible. But I think that's not going to be the way they approach the season. I think that they are going to approach the season with like a leave it all out there on the floor every single night. And obviously there are a lot of middling teams that are going to try to have that mindset because who doesn't want to play hard? Which coach doesn't want to win as many games as possible? But at the end of the day, as much as there's been turnover, this is the exact same coaching staff from last season. They're still at the Auerbach Center with the Celtics banners and the championship culture. And they still have several key members from the championship team, including Derek White and Jaylen Brown, but also Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser. And Jason Tatum's there in the building. And something that I noticed from Media Day is that everybody's been talking about how inspiring it's been to see Tatum and his work ethic. And obviously, we've all seen the video at this point. We've all seen the highlights and how it looks like he's moving pretty good. And it's just about 5 months since his injury. But it does seem like it's setting a little bit of a culture tone for the rest of the group, that Jason Tatum is grinding, trying to his best to get back out there. And that's kind of like hanging over everybody, that they feel inspired and moved by it. And Sam Hauser talked about it. And a couple of guys brought it up even on their own accord of just how that's really stood out to them from the summer. And Tatum has been at the facility the entire summer. He could have gone to LA. He could have gone back home to St. Louis. He could have taken some time off, but that's not the way that he's dealt with it. And everybody's talked quite a bit about that. It seems like it's a kind of an open secret. I actually thought that he might not be around. And I didn't see him today, but I saw him after the Bill Chisholm press conference. He was working out then and there as well. Obviously, he was in the building yesterday for media day. And I asked him yesterday about whether there was a turning point in his recovery. And he said that honestly, once he felt like he accepted the injury, that was going to be a part of his story, that was going to be part of the trajectory of his career, that he was going to be better. So it took him about a month to accept. I ruptured my Achilles. That is a part of my journey now. Maybe the accolades that he was chasing as far as his total career points and total games played and total minutes, all of those things might have been hurt. But that's part of his journey. And, his new story now can include this really epic comeback. And it seems like that kind of clicked to him about a month in. So when will he be back? I think that he will be back at some point this season, but he just won't be first team All NBA Tatum, which means that the Celtics shouldn't rely on him to come in and carry them to a finals appearance. I think if I had to guess, though, he'll be back at some point March. And it'll be in a much more limited version of himself. So March would be about 10 months after the injury. That's my guess. As much as he's on the court right now, being on the court and being cleared for NBA basketball is two completely different scenarios. So I don't think we're going to get a lot of Tatum updates. There's not going to be a timeline. Brad Stevens, whenever he's been asked, he's deflected. He said, our number one priority is for him to be 100% recovered. He said yesterday, Tatum said yesterday that there's no pressure on him. But it's going to be a looming thing. It's going to be a looming storyline, and we'll see how much we see of him this week at camp. I'm curious to see if he'll travel, if he'll be at preseason games, what all that's going to look like, because obviously he is going to prioritize his health, and maybe it's not worth them to get on a plane every time they have a road game. So we'll see about all of that. But I think we're going to see a really hard camp here. And I think we're going to see a Celtics team that is feeling we have been the hunter for a long time. Luka Garza talked about this at Summer League, that, now you're the hunt, now you're the hunter. You've been the hunted for a long time, I should say. The Celtics have said, when teams see them on their calendar, it's the defending champs. And even before that, they were routinely one of the most dominant teams in the Eastern Conference for nearly a decade, right? That was the big storyline. And so that's not going to be the case now. I don't think teams have the Celtics circled on their calendar. They didn't get a Christmas Day game, all of that. So we'll see how it pans out, but I think you're going to see a team that's scrappier and hungrier and less talented, but still a team that's going to be a hard out. So we'll see how it goes. Certainly, that's the thing to be most curious about. The battle that I'm following most closely is the front court rotation minutes, because ultimately that's the position where there's just the most uncertainty. And one of those guys is going to have to hit, because if all three of them struggle, this is going to be a long year. And Chris Boucher, I haven't mentioned him much, but he's talked about how it's been great to be acclimated to this team. The Joe Mazzulla actually went to his baptism along with some members of the coaching staff, and that meant a lot, and that the acclimation has been really good. So he's more of a four, more of a power forward, and more veteran, a little bit more of a proven player. But as far as the center, you're probably going to need Luka or Nemi or even X at one point to be on the floor, and that's where you still have an open question. So I'll be following that storyline. We'll be talking to those guys more and more throughout camp. Certainly curious to see how Nemi holds up after he looked really good at Eurobasket, and how honestly he had some great flashes last season, and sometimes his benching felt more of a result of how many talented centers they had, especially when Porzingis was back and healthy. So those are my initial thoughts. The other storyline that's kind of been in the backdrop is Anthony Simons and Peyton Pritchard. And, there have been a couple of questions to Joe that have been framed as Anthony Simons and Peyton Pritchard are both really good players. How are you kind of balancing that? And he has really shot down any conversation around the starting lineup. And he's made very clear that, one of those guys is going to start and one of them is not, but that's not going to be a big discussion for them. They're both going to be important to this team. They do different things. I think he wants to make sure that they're not constantly compared to one another because they ultimately are in different spots in their career. Peyton Pritchard is on a multi-year extension with the Celtics, coming off a 6th Man of the Year season where he's never been a primary scoring option, but he's done a lot of the little things, a lot of winning things for this team. Whereas Anthony Simons for the last couple seasons was the primary scoring option on a not so good Blazers team, but has terrible defensive marks. And he's talked about openly about how he just needs to be better on that end. So in my opinion, I think that Peyton Pritchard will start or should start. I think that he'll ultimately be a bigger part of this team moving forward. But there's also a case to be made that he's been really good at coming off the bench. And so maybe you keep that and keep Anthony Simons what he's familiar to, and see if Peyton can come in and kind of do what he's been doing for this team for the last few years. So not something that I think we're going to get a lot of sound on from Joe Mazzulla. He's shut down that conversation pretty quickly, and I think the players have as well. But we'll see next week at preseason. I'll be at both games in Memphis and Toronto, and that'll give me a better sense of kind of like, okay, where are things at? Is one guy starting then? Does that even mean anything? I don't know if they're going to necessarily go with the right starting lineup, but we'll see all of that. So that's it for now. I wanted to just jump on here and talk a little bit about the first couple of days of media day and training camp. We'll have more coverage throughout the week. Celtics are back in action at 11 o'clock tomorrow, as well as Friday and Saturday. Yeah, so they got tomorrow, Friday, Saturday. Yes, that's right. And so we'll be back with some more updates, more coverage, and I'll have some WNBA stuff. I know there's a lot going on the WNBA side, so I'll have some stuff on that on our WNBA channel, WNBA Today on CLNS, in just a couple of hours here. So thank you as always for tuning in. Enjoy the WNBA playoffs. Enjoy all of the coverage coming out of Celtics training camp, and have a great rest of your day.